Good evening. Welcome to WBUR CitySpace. Look at this. We're tasting beer. We're having fun. My name is Stephen Davey. I'm the senior producer here at WBUR CitySpace. Thank you to Cambridge School of Culinary Arts for supporting the event tonight and providing the delicious bites that we've all been enjoying with tonight's beers. Yes, give it up. Do it. We're going to announce the winner of the raffle at the end of the talk, so hopefully you all got your names into the raffle for $150 gift cards. That's pretty awesome. If you haven't, race out of the theater when we're done and we'll get you set up. Okay, speaking of beers, any favorites? Who's... Shout it out, shout it out. What do you... The Lamplighter. Lamplighter, yes? Sam Adams? Yes? Oh, good. Excellent. They're all very, very good. After the conversation, we're going to open the tasting back up in case there were any breweries that you missed or need to revisit. Welcome to a special edition of Curated Cuisine. That's our series dedicated to chefs and their cooking journeys. But if you're like me, the path toward the creation of amazing cuisine is arm in arm with a glass of beer. Who's with me? All right. The closer the brewery to where I'm sitting, the better. Chefs, like brewers, are passionate about where they are and their ingredients. Breweries are also the center of community, a home for conversation and a water cooler of culture. With over 200 breweries here, Massachusetts has become a leading beer producer in the country. We're at the epicenter of the latest movement in the craft brewing world. That's why we're here tonight, to taste, savor, and explore. Guiding us along the way tonight is Radio Boston host Tiziana Dearing. The Radio Boston series Brewed in Mass was the inspiration for tonight, and there are three brewers and entrepreneurs I want to introduce you to. Ray Berry is the founder of White Lion Brewing Company in Springfield. Vilja Bizakowska is the co-founder and head brewer at Break Rock Brewing in Quincy. Sam Hendler is the co-owner of Jack's Abbey Brewery, Craft Brewers in Framingham. And we're taking your questions. Head to Slido, sli.do, and enter the code BEER. sli.do for your questions. Now, please give a warm welcome to Tiziana, Ray, Vilja, and Sam.
Hello, everybody. All right, should we put our mics in our laps and do this? All right, we're going to start by opening our water bottles for the evening.
Right. Hope you all have yours. Cheers.
Cheers, everybody.
Cheers to you, my friend.
And I want to note that when we asked each of our guests tonight which beer they wanted, they were all adamant that they wanted to pick one that wasn't their own. And I have found in doing the Brewed in Mass series for Radio Boston that is so deeply characteristic of the brewing industry in Massachusetts that I think that it'll be a theme we'll return to over and over again tonight in our conversation. I do want to start with each of you personally, and this will be hopefully, or at least maybe, the only time I'll do the traditional same question for all of you starting on the end, but just once, same question for all of you starting on the end. And Ray, I'll start with you. Why'd you want to do this? Not the event.
Exhale, right. I come from the quasi-public nonprofit space, but I'm big on creativity, the entrepreneurial spirit, and the city of Springfield, which is the third largest city in the Commonwealth, anchors Western Massachusetts. There was a lot of craft conversation going on. A lot of cities and towns were trying to bring a brewery into their economic development space, but there was no such conversation in the city of Springfield, and that's the origin of the conversation. I had an opportunity to sit on the Liquor License Commission in the city, and going out and visiting these locations, they wanted something to rally around. They wanted a hometown spirit, and I was able to put some conversation together, and that's really how it started.
So I'll stay with you for a second, because this idea that choice, this choice to enter this industry is a change agent choice is an interesting one. Can you react to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember early on in my career, I wanted to get to a point where I was an executive director or president of a nonprofit organization. but you have a calling. Sometimes you're drawn into certain things. I realized over the years that I would always come up with an idea, but park that idea, and then that idea would go away. But the craft beer conversation kept coming over and over and over again. And once you start that conversation with key stakeholders, it really did draw me in even further. And I'm just very fortunate enough to have a lot of great people around me, a lot of support in the city of Springfield that allowed this to move forward.
So Vilia, I'll turn to you now. Why did you want to do this?
Why did I want to do this? At first, I never wanted to do this. This was never this was never what I thought. This wasn't where I was going to go. I kind of found it and discovered I loved it. I was supposed to be, well, I did become a registered dietitian, and the summer I graduated college, I got a job at a brewery because I thought it would be fun for the summer. It was supposed to be a part-time thing. That's it, 3 months while I studied for my board exams, that's it. But once I got in there, I was like, oh, this is just a big chemistry set. This is food science. I have a food science degree, and this is food science. And the people there were amazing, everything. I got it. And that was it. I loved it. And I also loved how, like, at the end of the day, you had, like, instant gratification of, like, look at all the kegs I filled. You know, look at all the beer I just brewed, you know. And it was actually really something that I never expected. It's not like your parents ever sit down and, like, give you that option of, like, do you want to go to college and become a brewer? So maybe we can have those conversations now.
So I'll stay with you for one more question. Is there any way in which doing this has aligned with the reasons you thought you wanted to be a dietitian?
Ooh. Have they aligned? I mean, I guess you can always go with the basic similarities of, we want to make people feel good. But basically not. but basically, I mean, even as a dietitian, I will say, in some people who know me, like, will attest to this. I always was the dietitian that was in favor for beer over wine, like, always. I was like, beer, especially like a good, like the 26.2 brew. I'm like, a good Goza. I'm like, that's like the healthiest beer you can probably have. So
all right, so you made a connection. I'm proud of you for that.
Thank you. I did.
All right, Sam, same question to you.
Yeah, I grew up in family business. My grandfather started, and then when I was growing up, my dad and uncle ran a packaged ice business together. And that's where me and my brothers basically lived during the weekends growing up, during the summers. So that's family business is all I know for sure. And then I kind of admire my big brother Jack more than anybody else in the world, and he's 7-8 years older than me. He got into the brewing industry, asked me and my other brother if we'd want to start a brewery with him, and that's how I got into it.
Okay, so now we're going to do, let me backtrack. I know you didn't actually say he's 78 years older than you. That's what I heard. So let's just repeat that so I get
7 to 8 years.
Okay.
Yeah, 7.5 years.
Okay, thank you. I had one sip. I want to be really clear. You saw it. One sip. He said 7 to 8, which is an unusual way to refer to how many years older than you your sibling is. All right, so we're going to do a lightning round now of a bunch of questions. So this is rapid fire answers. Everybody can answer at once, or one person who gets there first, etc. And the first of this lightning round is from an audience member. Someone tell me, what is a hop? Go.
Hops are an ingredient in the beer. They grow on a vine, so go up 20 plus, almost 30 feet high in the air, and you get these looks like a green leafy pine cone, and
Flowers.
These flowers. They, in adding to the beer, can express in a whole bunch of different ways. Bitterness being one of the ways. Can express with really nice aromatics, grassy, herbal to citrusy to tropical fruit notes, all kinds of different expressions that the hops can have in the final product. But at its core, you're talking about a natural, ingredient that you are adding to the beer.
Gorgeous answer. Was it a lightning answer?
Great.
I was going to say, man, I thought this was a rapid fire.
The Godfather.
right?
What's it supposed to taste like?
There's only 4 ingredients in beer. You can't ask me about one of the 4 ingredients and expect an answer that's lightning fast.
That's funny. That's true, right?
That's on me.
We don't have a lot to know. Different ingredients.
What's a hop supposed to taste like?
Well, you don't want to put one in your mouth and eat it. I can tell you that right now. So somebody, you always haze the new folks, being like, yeah, you try all the parts of beer that you make, and then try pellet.
So is it bitter, sour?
It really depends on how you utilize that particular strain of hop. It could be bitter, it could be fruity, it could be tropical. You can brew it to create sours and other types of styles of beer. So yeah, it depends on the palate or the appetite of the brewer, the brew team, and the approach that they want to have for the end user.
Is it possible to count the number of types of beers?
The number of types of beers that are out there,
Yeah. Not that,
styles.
Yeah, styles. Thank you.
There is a lot
There are a lot.
Could
of
you even count it?
styles.
I'll say somebody actually asked me that the other day, how many styles are there? And it was like, oh, well, it could be an indefinite amount, because what is style? And I said, well, when you enter in a beer competition, there are style categories. So if you want to go based off of that, it's like over 100. Yeah. That's about 120 or so.
I was going to say about 130, maybe more than
130,
that.
more than that,
Okay.
with the new experimental things going on.
2 more in the lightning round. One is an audience question. Begins with be as snobby as possible. All right.
Ooh.
Your favorite style. Go. Ray.
Pinky out, fruited, sour.
All right. Sam.
Brewed.
Golden lager.
All right. V.
Oh, I'm a sucker for an English mild.
Okay. Last lightning round question. First style of beer you ever tasted. Sam.
Golden lager.
V.
It was a Hefeweizen.
All right. Ray.
I think it was Bear Republic, a West Coast IPA.
Ooh, yeah.
All right. All right. Now, I want to spend a little time in the industry. In doing the Brewed in Massachusetts series, I learned several things. One, I was surprised to find out how prominent the craft beer and beer industry in Massachusetts is. By one count, 6th largest in the United States. Really, really robust beer ecosystem. And one that is really quite mutually supportive. So the first question, Ray, I'll start with you on this. What is it about Massachusetts that allows for that robust of an industry?
I had shared, and I'll share with this audience, again, from the nonprofit space, we have a number of community organizations that work to move the needle in the right direction for the greater good of that respective community. And it's really no different in the craft beer space in Massachusetts. You have a lot of great brewers that are working in their own respective community for the greater good of that community, providing day in and day out support, putting in and hiring folks, economic development, job creation, job retention, and at the end of the day, we all work in a collective unit. We support each other relative to branding, advocacy, consumer base, sharing ingredients, sharing hops, sharing supplies and equipment, and that is what really made me feel welcome in the craft beer space from outside in. And it's kudos to the industry in Massachusetts.
Sam, why? Why does the beer industry in Massachusetts work that way? Not every industry does.
Yeah, the tone was set by people way before us. There's, groups of brewers, talk about Boston Beer, to Harpoon, to Berkshire Brewing, to Ipswich, to Mayflower. They're people who started this industry in Massachusetts 30 years ago, and they set that tone. That's pretty much the group that started the Massachusetts Brewers Guild, which is kind of the official banner we get under together when we work with each other and advocate on behalf of the industry. And they set that tone that we are a collaborative industry.
How would the industry be different here in Massachusetts if there weren't such a collaborative tone, if there weren't sharing of recipes and resources? And I'm going to make that a 2-part question. I'll give you part one. Set, to the extent that anybody can, set COVID aside.
Yeah.
right? We'll come back to COVID in a minute. Set COVID aside, how would the industry be different?
If we weren't,
If it weren't a collaborative and supportive industry here.
well, then I feel like it would be like every other business that's out there, right? Where you tend to just not fully trust the other people. You tend to want to like spy on other people. You kind of want to, everything's now your secret proprietorship, and everything has to be trademarked. And I don't know. It's how would it be? It would definitely not be. You wouldn't get the beer festivals that you were getting, that's for sure. Because the beer festivals are just as much fun. That's a reunion for all the breweries. Like that's really like brewers consider that a reunion every year. We used to have those back over at the World Trade Center in Seaport there. And it wouldn't. Yeah.
Go ahead, Ray.
That's a tough question.
It'd be very divisive. A lot of finger pointing.
Yeah.
A lot of beer politics. Imagine that, right?
And definitely and no support of anything new. Anyone putting a new style would probably get like.
But what happens is you start having the consumer gravitating towards one particular brand, and then they could be negative towards another brand because of all of that, right? To your point, because there's a strong collective, everyone in the consumer base wants to support Massachusetts breweries, and that's how it should be. If there was that fragmentation, that wouldn't happen.
Anything you want to add?
I mean, just the beer would be worse. Like that knowledge sharing is really
Yes,
important.
actually,
Like
yeah.
just straight up, you would be drinking lousier beer on a day-to-day basis if you were buying beer from mass breweries and we weren't sharing information, best practices, ingredients, all of these things. It would lead to lousy beer, which would be like the worst
That is
possible
very valid. No, that's
scenario.
100% true.
Well, and it's interesting to have you say, give the 100% to that, V,
Yeah.
because you're one of the newest entrants, right, into the industry, and a young woman, actual brewer, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've learned is there are many ways to be part of the brewing business,
Yep.
but you're actually a brewer, right?
Oh, yeah.
So talk a little bit more about that. Like, so learning that craft, like you're a chef of beer,
Right,
right?
right.
So talk a
Essentially,
little
yeah.
more about that.
About being a brewer?
Yes, about being a chef o' beer.
Being a chef o' beer.
How you learned to do that? Was that challenging to learn? Who do you apprentice with that? How do you develop those skills?
How did the skills kind of, again, like as I said, I didn't expect to do this, right? And it kind of came in naturally through getting a summertime job on the Cape at a brewery after I graduated college. And I said, study for my board exams, let me work at a brewery. Be great. I'll bum around on the beach, work at a brewery. It was only supposed to be a summertime job, be awesome. But then once I got in there, I was like, this is just a big chemistry set. And and so naturally I already knew a lot of the science behind it naturally. And then mind you, like all through college, I ran a beer paraphernalia store. So literally selling like all beer pints, glasses, neon signs, like man cave signs, like all sorts of stuff. So I naturally, knew of all the local breweries, hence why I ended up finding that Cape Cod Beer was hiring for the summer, and got into that. And then at the end of the summer, Todd said, don't do this. He literally said, don't do this. He's like, go be a dietitian, go make money, go like live a happy life. And of course, I'm like, sure. And then continued on getting a job at Blue Hills Brewery, which led me to him giving me a call back saying, hey, I heard you didn't become a brewer. Would you be willing to come back? And like, we need a brewer. We'll come and like train you up. And we did. And so I did. And then they literally kind of started me from the bottom and taught me everything that you needed to know all the way up to the whole entire brewing industry. And then once I did this for a couple of years, I said, man, I'm in this, like, I love this. I love this career. I know it's cliche to say, but I've never worked a day in my life. I really haven't. I never had a case of the Mondays, especially on the Cape. Cape Cod would turn into like a 24-hour brewery in the summertime, right? I said, this is the only job that would happily get me out of bed at 1 a.m. to be on the brew deck by 3 a.m. And I would have no problem with it. I loved it. And so once I just realized I was getting into it and staying into it, then I decided, let me go to beer school because I want to learn even more. So I actually did. I went and got a formal beer degree on top of everything. And then, ironically, a few years later, fast forward a few years later, I ended up working for that brewing school, being an instructor, teaching brewing and how to open breweries.
Yeah.
And then, ironically, the year that I started working for them was the year that my now business partner decided to go to the brewing school. So I actually graded all of my business partners' exams.
Talk about small
So
world.
funny. Very small world. That's what I say. Very small world.
So if you want to ask questions, sly.dough, #beer. The next question kind of sets up, I'm going to ask the audience question. Ray, this is coming to you, and then I'm going to put some package around the question before I turn to you to answer it.
Yeah,
The
thank you.
audience question is, how did you find the initial capital for your business? Did you use venture capital? How did you convince them to invest in your brewery versus others? This sits prominently in my mind because when I first tasted my first beer from White Lion, which was the Marcus Camby, you couldn't be on the show because you were awaiting the birth of your baby in February. Someone else brought your beers onto the show. We were talking about Black-owned breweries, in which world you are legend, I think would be the right word. And we were doing some comparing and contrasting of access to capital with another series we had been doing, which is the cannabis industry, and the challenges around Black-owned businesses accessing capital to bring Black wealth into communities. And that's a different set of challenges with the cannabis industry because of the way the banking system works and something being illegal at the federal level and legal at the state level. But the idea that you want to take a business, create Black wealth, but the access to capital limits the ability to do that, sat in the middle of that conversation. So I want to put that wrapper around the question to you as a pioneer, as you talk about financing, access, support, et cetera.
Pioneer is a very strong word, just so we're clear.
Is it wrong?
No, well, there's always the alpha. So there's always someone paving the way. And it doesn't matter the background of that individual, right? So you could be white, black, brown, male, female, multiple gender identities. You start somewhere. That somewhere exposes people to something. Massachusetts has 200 breweries. Only a half dozen are Black or brown owned. So yeah, are we one of the 1%ers or less than that? Absolutely. In my lens, it's important for White Lion to try and model the way. To your point, to try to open a door and showcase what other folks can do within the space. There's a perception that the space is male, white dominant. That's the perception. We're trying to change that perception and that perceived reality. So in Springfield, we try to bring everyone into the fold, make the space comfortable for everyone. And in that optic, there may be someone on the sideline. There may be someone on the sideline here. They see that, and it may encourage them. It may encourage them. They may not be a brewer. They may be an investor. They may be someone that creates creative artwork for the brewery. So there's many different, they could be a farmer, right? So there's many different avenues that can open up by just seeing. And sometimes the Black and brown communities feel as if they're not part of the space, but if they can see more activity, more action, they feel more welcome into the space. And that's what we try to do, model that way.
And how has the experience of getting investment in Springfield to build a business been?
So we bootstrapped. I was working full-time. Mike, my partner, business partner and brewer, was working full-time. So we were full-time, part-time brewing. We didn't have the capital to go right to a brick and mortar. We had to go and build the brand, build the optic, take the brand, take the experience to the community. And we were very fortunate enough to slowly build some momentum behind the brand. Again, the support of the city of Springfield, Western Massachusetts, even the Brewers Guild along the way. And that momentum allowed us to get to a point where we felt we were in a place to bring that brick and mortar. That was always the goal. That was always the objective. But you never know. There's always that statistic, 1 out of every X amount of businesses or X amount of businesses fail. And we just didn't want to be one of those statistics. So we were very fortunate enough to be able to piece a number of the puzzle together through grants and personal finances and getting to a point to become where we were bankable and take that approach.
Sam, let's stick with this brick and mortar moment. On a sort of a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being it's just not that important, to 5 being it's the most important thing. How important is reaching the stage of a brick and mortar business to business survival, or sort of the tipping point in a brewery's life?
Sure, yeah. In the craft beer space, I think at this point, to be long-term sustainable brand, you need some brick and mortar presence. That doesn't necessarily mean you need a giant facility where you make every drop of beer you'll ever sell, but having a tap room, having some experience to offer where people can come to you, try something new, try something different, experience your brand is absolutely critical to the long-term success of
Why?
business. You need to make some tangible connection with the consumer. I don't know, maybe there's a way to do that purely through ad spend and marketing dollars, and there may be some craft breweries that have opened up, funded well enough to do that, but realistically, it's going to be a lot smaller and slower, but that is super sustainable. When you put those roots down in a community and you open yourself up to that community and you do right by that community, you will hopefully be embraced by that community, and that's what can sustain you long term.
V, you look like you had more you
Oh,
wanted
no,
to say
that's
there.
exactly what I was going to say. I was going to say, well, it's important because, too, you end up establishing relationships with people, and people tend to want to support someone that they can see and they talk to, and you get to know someone, and then that you become so tied into it, and it's difficult if you don't have a space to go to. I mean, having like the people that come into our space, they come in and our taproom staff is amazing. Instantly, everyone like becomes family. Like all customers just like feel so relaxed there, and they tend to come back. And everyone, the staff really are amazing. They remember everyone's faces. When you just come in once, they'll still like remember your face, which is awesome. And it just now makes you feel validated, makes you feel home. So now like having that connection just makes you want to support them, and then that word of mouth, and then just having that, that's a whole business type of marketing that is really, you can't put a price on really, and I don't think you tend to realize how much value it actually has.
So let's stay in that vein. There's an audience question on that. In your experience, which comes first, the vibrant town center or the brewery? And I was telling Sam before, I have a terrible time saying the word brewery. And so doing a whole series on this has been painful. And it is something that in doing this series has come up over and over again, that a good brewery with a brick and mortar space has this sort of symbiotic relationship with the community. It's so much more than a beer business. It's an art space and a community space and a gathering space. So Ray, there's a chicken and an egg question here.
It is.
It is a chicken and egg question.
Sorry.
So we had a brand. We didn't have the physical location. I'm pro Springfield. Worked in Springfield forever. Part of the community. So the brand, without a physical location, had to enter the community space, because you didn't have anything to come to. You didn't have the experience to come to the brick and mortar. So by way of pop-up beer gardens, special events, special partnerships, special collaborations, whether it's the Eastern States Exposition Big E, whether it's a special beer with the museums, whatever it may be, right? That's how we got ingrained and was looked at as a viable entity or entrant into the business space, into the food and beverage space in the city of Springfield without having that brick and mortar. When we got the brick and mortar, then it was even more of a groundswell, because you proved your point over 7 years. You tried, you pushed through COVID, right? Trials and tribulations, you stumbled along the way, you looked at 4 locations, those 4 locations didn't work out, right? You just bootstrapped and we stood with it. And once we got the brick and mortar, it was a relief. And again, the support has been incredible. So it's been a journey, but we started in the center without the brick, and then was able to resonate in the community and then bring the brick later.
What do you guys love most about your spaces? What do you love most about your spaces?
I mean, we're located literally on the water. Like, we're one of Massachusetts' only breweries that, like, on the water. Like, I tell people, like, catch on fire, open the door, I'm in the water. Like, so that is, I mean, when we found our space, it was like one of those, we saw so many buildings and we couldn't find anything. And, you know, we found them, maybe we were like, this one would work, maybe this one would work. It ended up not working out for various reasons. But then when we got to Marina Bay, it was just like, oh, that pit of your stomach, like, I'm home feeling. Like, you just knew that it was like, that was your spot. And then we tell, like, all of us, that 5 o'clock, like, sunset, that, like, golden hour that we get right around in Marina Bay, it's unlike a sunset you get anywhere else. And I'm like, oh, that's what the rent's for that 15 minutes every time. And I just feel like I said, like, I have, like, photos of, like, the same sunset every night, but I'm like, no, I swear it's different. It's different. These colors are different. It's that, oh, that's what I love about it, is that sunset.
Anyone else?
Amazing, the water.
That's not quite the downtown Framingham experience. And honestly, the space, we're in this old giant industrial building. It's not the pretty glass like this room here, all new and shiny and perfect. It ends up being the people in there, the buzz, the energy, that is what makes the space special. Without that, it's a giant metal box. And yeah, it's that energy is so amazing when it's going, when it's right, when it's Friday night and it's busy and people are enjoying themselves and laughing, and that's the whole magic.
So we're going to take a beer break. And what I mean by that is we're going to literally talk about beer again for a minute. One question that came up in conversations with people before we actually came up on stage tonight is, what is this New England IPA thing? Why is it a thing? Where did it come from, and should it be a thing? And my understanding is that it causes quite strong feelings among people. So whoever would like to pick that one up, please explain. Anyone?
Oh, man.
Ray, go for it.
No.
No?
Referring to the Godfather.
All right. Godfather.
Craft lagers,
No,
dude.
no, no,
I am
no,
not
no.
qualified for this question.
V, do you have strong feelings?
I've got feelings. It's funny. We all got feelings. Honestly. I mean, to answer your first question, so what is a New England IPA, right? So, every style of beer has its, specification definition. So, New England IPA is supposed to, now if you enter into competition, it's supposed to be a very, an IPA that is tropical fruit tasting, very fruit forward tasting, with a big body, like a thick hazy body. It needs to be very, very hazy, because points deducted for clarity. Like, not what you want. A higher ABV on the spectrum.
That's alcohol by volume.
Yes.
Okay.
So a higher alcohol content typically, and with supposed to have all the big aromatics of everything. It's supposed to, the smell is supposed to be the big bouquet there for you, and it's supposed to almost be like a chewy, like, beer.
You're really selling it, B.
Telling you, trying to like define this here, right?
So when an audience member says, what is the difference between a New England and West Coast IPA?
So New England IPAs kind of they're like more like the younger generation of what is now deferred as a hazy IPA. And hazy IPAs were kind of like what New England IPAs were first talked about, because back when you had people like the Alchemists that were putting out these really hoppy beers, when Hetty Topper was coming out and Len Lawson was putting out his Sip of Sunshine, that was beer that they were doing, that they just crammed a bunch of hops towards the end, and it was like this amazing, cool experience that you never had before, really. And that, it was beers that were being made in New England that were doing that, so they became New England beers. And then now, like New England IPA, kind of slowly shifted, where now the newer breweries and newer brewers were kind of like, well, let's settle it up a little, not make it as bitter anymore. So now the more bitter ones are now the hazy IPAs, and New England IPAs are now more fluffy beers. And I remember like Sean Lawson, he specifically was saying, he's like, I don't make New England IPAs. He's like, I make beers in New England. And I'm like, exactly.
All right.
So it's,
Sam, apparently I'm going to call you Godfather now. Yeah.
Father now.
So Godfather. Earlier in the conversation, you said there are 4 ingredients in beer. This is right when I was giving you a hard time for giving a long answer on hops. So what are the 4 ingredients in beer?
Water. It's an important one.
Main.
It's like 98% of what you're drinking. Malt, so malted barley generally could be some other grains used as well. Wheat, the most common other grain. Hops, and then the key thing that makes the magic happen is your yeast. So yeast is going to drive your fermentation, create alcohol and carbon dioxide, as well as, depending on the styles, some flavor contribution as well.
Okay, so that was it for our beer break. We're going to go back to the industry for a little while. We'll probably have time for one more beer break, beer questions a little bit later. Because I do want to, it came up earlier, and then Ray, you brought it up again. There was this thing that happened, which was a global pandemic, which disrupted a lot of industries, and certainly an industry that, as the 3 of you have underscored, relied so heavily on the goodwill that comes from community and face-to-face contact by bringing people into your brick and mortar spaces. And so one of the things that I've heard from various breweries that we've talked to during the series on Radio Boston is that the pivots that various craft beer makers made were as creative as we've heard through the restaurant industry and other industries, but that community, right, that banding together was also critical to mutual survival. So I will put out 2 questions. You pick the one you think is most satisfying for you to answer, right? Either what's the biggest lesson that you learned about running your business through COVID, or who helped save you the most in your world during COVID?
Okay. So I had shared that we were in the process of building our brick and mortar. We started construction in November of 2019 and thought that we would open by June or July of 2020. The pandemic went full scale in February, March, and everything just stopped. So I can still envision the space just halfway, quarter way through construction, and it just created all kind of uncertainty. And we wouldn't be here, or I wouldn't be here today if it were not for you, to be honest with you, because the pivot allowed us to, the state allowed us to, the federal, city, and state government allowed us to still open our doors, do cans to go, allow you to come in and buy the beer. The off-premise locations were looked at as, what's the term? Essential businesses. And it allowed them to continue to keep their doors open, which allowed them to continue to buy beer. So even though there was that void, that cavity, if it were not for the public space and the consumer coming in and seeing what we were trying to do and continue to assist us, allowing us to do cans to go, et cetera, those examples, federal subsidy, state subsidy, city, and other nonprofit subsidies along the way allowed us to push through, and then in June of 2021, we were able to open up our doors.
V. Sam, do either of you have anything you'd like to add to those questions?
Oh, I mean, I can tell you our experience, because it was similar, because that's why we were saying we were kind of like bonding over for a hot minute there right before this so we were scheduled to open summer of 2020, We just had our 1-year anniversary a year ago, like 1-year anniversary a month ago. But we were supposed to have been summer of 2020. We had everything all lined up. We had picked out our contractor. Everything was lined up. Everything was ready to go, and all they needed was just the money from the bank. And the bank was like, you know what? Yep, you're 95% of the way there. This is an easy thing to do. They're like, go ahead. You can get the balls rolling on stuff. So go ahead and sign your 10-year lease. Go ahead and put all your money for your deposit down for your equipment. Go ahead. Like, all right, great. So any tangible monies that we physically had went for the down payment of the brewing system, and we signed the lease and everything, and then the bank turns around. It's just like, February. With February, we're filming our promo video, our promo video on the boardwalk, end of February to launch it, for March, to say we're opening up summer of 2020. And then March came and the bank was like, here's your money. Oh, just kidding. We're freezing all small business loans. So sorry. We'll reevaluate in the new year. This is March, new year. So for 9 months, we're like, well, so, we were like, what do we do? To our building, we were like, I guess you can sue us because we're not going to pay rent. Where did this money come from? And then, and with our, ordered all of our equipment, and the way that it's supposed to work is that if you can't pay the rest of your payments, they built it and they were like, hey, where do you want this shipped? And we're like, we don't have anywhere for you to ship it right now because we don't know if we're going to be in this building anymore, if they're going to kick us out. We don't know what's going to happen. And what they're supposed to do is they're supposed to sell it to somebody else to recuperate their money. And then basically if I wanted another equipment, I'd have to start from scratch and give them a whole another $75,000 down payment, right? But luckily we were very much saved by those exact same people. Our building genuinely wanted us there. And they're like, no worries, we'll redo the paperwork. We're not going to charge you rent. We're not going to charge, the other people rent too, all the other businesses. They were one of the lucky buildings that ended up just not becoming, I'm going to come break your kneecaps, give me your rent type of place. They were very much understanding. And they were like, no, we want you here. Plus, who else is going to open up a business because they're not giving anyone a loan. So the building's fine. We're not advertising. We're not going to kick you out. So they were very good to us. And then our equipment company did a personal favor for me where, because they had known me and they said, hey, you know what? COVID actually froze any breweries opening up. So we're actually not manufacturing any brew houses, which means nobody's buying them. So we can't even sell yours anyways. But that section of our building isn't being used because nobody's building a brewery right now. So we can just store it there. We don't mind storing it there. We'll let you store for as long as we possibly can, free of charge, because we're still making a lot of money right now because our canning line department is just ramping up because now every brewery had to start canning. And so they're like, yeah, we're still in the black because we're making all these canning lines, but the brew house section's just boring. So you can go we don't mind housing your stuff there as a favor. And they did that for us, which is amazing. Because they ended up holding it for a year and a half because that's how long it took. So, and the one thing that delayed our last part of us opening was our equipment. The thing that was ready for us a year and a half was the thing that was the last thing to come in, and it was because of the shipping container shortage.
So you really did live that full experience.
Oh,
the
full
COVID
experience.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So Stephen, I can see you in there. I just want to double check with you. We started about 10 minutes late. Do I have a hard 7:30 stop, or am I going a few minutes over? We'll go a few minutes over, okay, because I just kind of want to plan my questions out. I want to shift gears a little bit here. I've got an audience question, and then again, I'll round out that question a little bit. The audience question: research shows that Gen Z is drinking less and more health conscious than previous generations. How is your brewery thinking about this trend for the future? And also just the overall increasing popularity of non-alcoholic options across the alcohol industry. I believe we had a non-alcoholic option, at least one, I think, out there on the floor tonight. So who wants to talk about that a little bit? The lower alcohol options, less drinking, non-alcohol options, how you think about that as a producer of alcohol products. Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, sure. The craft beer industry doesn't survive off of volume. We don't survive off of 30 racks of cans as cheap as possible that are being consumed at 3 o'clock in the morning in a college basement. That's not our business model, never has been our business model. I don't think it ever will be our business model. Consumption going down as far as volume goes, I don't think should be a scary thing, as long as we can keep winning the share of mind of what that consumption is. You know, beer is still, even in Massachusetts, which is a very successful state for the craft beer environment, it's still a relatively small part of the beer industry. And we, as an industry, need to keep winning share of mind in beer. And if we do that, again, craft beer does not survive off of that sort of volume type of consumption. We are looking for people who are interested in a 4-pack a week or a 12-pack a week. Great customer for a craft brewer. Yeah, that doesn't scare me. The non-alcoholic space is really interesting. There's a couple brewers who have been exceptionally successful in it the last few years. We are playing around with it. It's actually a pretty big challenge for small craft brewers. It's probably why you haven't seen 1 million craft brewers step into this space just yet. It requires different equipment and different packaging capabilities to do properly and safely. Alcohol itself is actually a big preservative, so it limits how much, we don't pasteurize our beer, for example. Pasteurization is an absolute must for non-alcoholic beer. So there's a lot of challenges for small brewers getting into the non-alcoholic space, but I do think it's an interesting space, one that we're looking at and trying to figure out if it does make sense for our beer long term.
How do you think about your relationship with public health? I mean, it is a question, right? Public health and alcohol have a complex relationship. You addressed part of that question, Sam, with we're looking for the 1 4-pack a week customer. But for any of the three of you, how do you think about the relationship between your business and your industry and public health?
Yeah, I'm not going to pretend it's a Pollyanna thing where, there's no possible negative effect. I do believe in the craft beer industry. I believe in the way we approach selling beer. There's a long documented history from large mega brewers of specifically targeting environments and underage and volume binge drinking habits that drive a lot of really nasty public health issues. Craft historically doesn't play that game, and I don't think ever should play that game. Certainly not a game that our brewery ever would play. And again, not to say that doesn't mean there's not somebody who's abusing Jack's Abbey product right now. I hope that's not the case, but we want to be good stewards. We want to model to our community what responsible drinking can look like, and that's what we try to do.
Okay, so let's go back to,
I was going to
go
say,
for it.
to kind of answer that with that question,
Yeah.
for me, that was kind of, I wasn't thinking so much, with public health, but it ended up being that way. Because for my, when we opened up our brewery, I was very adamant about wanting to, I felt like beer was kind of going a little bit too extreme. And I was like, we need to just re-educate our consumers and remind them about a lot of things. So at Break Rock Brewery, we don't do pints. We don't do a 16-ounce pour. They're they're a 12-ounce, 13-ounce pour. And it was and all the beer, most of the beers, I really try to stay, the majority of the range is a, 5.5% alcohol beer is the majority of the styles you can get. And it was we got to go back to remembering that Like, if you're trying to do the nitty-gritty math of, your body can process 1 beer per hour, well, that's based off of a 5% alcohol 12-ounce beer. 12-ounce can used to be a serving of beer. Now we've somehow, 16 ounces cans have become the new craft brewery can. And I think, like, trying to naturally remodel that into, like, let people, just recognize exactly what a serving of beer is versus, because how many times have you had people like, oh man, like, I don't know how I got drunk off of 2 beers. And it's like, well, I mean, a 16 ounce at 8.5%, I mean, it's like 2 beers is more like, 3.5, like 4. So that's something that I was very, very like passionate about and adamant about. So at our brewery, like they're 13 ounce pours. And I mean, of course we will have the 7 or maybe an 8 around, there'll be the one outlier for accommodate for anyone's wants and needs. Even we have our Belgian triple that's at 10.2 right now. But then we also, I'm big on session beers. So there's something that's in the 4% range all the time too.
All right, let's do one more lightning round on beer itself. And some of these are audience questions. For example, what is your favorite state other than Massachusetts for beer?
Colorado.
Vermont, of course.
I'm from New Jersey, so I'll just say New Jersey.
All right. Here's one I did not see coming. I swear to God, this is a question from the audience. What beer goes well with tater tots?
That's a great question.
Every beer goes well with tater tots. What
Can't go
kind of
wrong.
question is that?
Like, right?
What's an ingredient you'd like to experiment with? Also from the audience.
Can I have tater tots, right? That's right.
I've done plenty
The
of
audience.
that experimentation. Don't worry.
What's an ingredient?
It's federally regulated. I mean, creativity and marrying cannabis and beer. I think that would be interesting.
Anybody else?
Just my opinion.
I mean, I'm kind of a purist. I'm kind of like a 4-ingredient brewer. So, because I kind of love the fact that I can manipulate those 4 ingredients to make it taste, look, smell completely different. So, things that are other ingredients, I'm like, what?
Right.
Like, what is this? But I did actually always want to do something with birch. And so we actually finally just did a collaboration with Sam Adams, and they came to Break Rock, and we did a really awesome birch.
Like birch, like the
birch,
tree.
like silver birch, bark and leaves and
The whole thing.
with black currants as well.
All right, so here's mine for you. Name a beer you've tasted where you thought, oh, I wish I'd done that. I wish that were mine.
Vitamin C and Brockton Beer Company had a collaboration during the whole Black is Beautiful campaign, and it was a sour. It was just rich with raspberry, and it may have had black currants in it. I'm not sure, but it was just dynamite. I was just like, I was blown away how they came together with that particular style of beer. It was awesome.
Sam, you?
I mean, I'm a beauty and simplicity guy. I love the classic German styles, but there's so much history in them. It's almost like impossible to steal that history away from them, which is a lot of the magic in it. So I don't know how to answer your question.
Okay, so I will reframe it. Give a shout out to someone else's beer.
Augustiner.
Okay.
Augustiner.
And how about you, V?
The folks that were end up doing like sake yeast with beers and lagers, doing like sake like lagers. It's like, come on, yeah, Todd doing that, and Widowmaker has like one like that. I'm like, that was cool. I kind of like the mishing of the two worlds there.
All right.
Typically don't think about.
So last question, and then Stephen, I can see that you're kind of headed towards us. Last question. 5 years from now, where do you think the industry is? Ray.
It definitely changed. The whole fabric will slowly change. The question you had, or 2 or 3 questions ago, about the Gen Zers.
Yeah.
The Gen Zers will eventually become the millennial, right, population, and then they'll become the Gen Xers and the baby, right? So they're setting the tone now, in my mind, on what the future looks like. There's a lot of pressures from RTDs, ready to drink. You have a lot of pressure from the cannabis industry. You have extra pressures from the spirit industry where they're trying to enter the space and lower price points. So, 5 years from now, I think that some breweries to survive are going to have to pivot and enter spaces that they are not comfortable in just to move forward. So it will be interesting to see how that evolves.
Sam.
Yeah, I think the thing that will sustain craft beer is the tap rooms, is these hospitality spaces, these that have become community centers. While I do think the wholesale side of the industry will see really dramatic changes, the way beer looks in retail stores and that, I do think ready-to-drink cocktails and whatever is next on the FMB front, flavored malt beverages, the hard seltzer thing kind of falls into there, and Twisted Tea is on a crazy run right now. So there's a lot of stuff adjacent to the space that is taking away literal shelf space from us right now. But again, as an industry, there's long-term sustainability in the tap rooms.
Last word to you, V.
And I'm going with you're saying. What do I see it going in 5 years is probably the same thing we've seen historically, which is right now we're seeing the ramp up of the RTDs and the seltzers, and you're like, okay, well this is where it's going to go, and beer's disappear. Beer's going to disappear maybe and not be so big and popular. It is what it is anymore. But in the end, doesn't it all repeat itself? Doesn't all of your mother's fashion now become what you're wearing now? So I'm still going to go ahead and say English beers and brown ales might be the cool future thing in 5 years, because we're bringing it all back. Bring back cream ales, and so who knows? Because if we're going that way, then who knows?
What's old will be new.
Yeah,
again.
what is old will be new, and when wantable again.
All right, as Stephen comes back up, please join me in thanking our panelists.
That was wonderful. Thank you all. That was really, really interesting. Thank you all for coming out, and to our virtual audience. And thank you again to our panelists. Thank you to Cambridge School of Culinary Arts for supporting the event tonight. Thank you, guys. That's awesome. Also, thank you to Katie Stinchen, Executive Director of the Massachusetts Brewers Guild. Where are you, Katie? Hey. She was a big help in putting this all together. I called her up and I said, we'd like to do this event. She's like, who would you like to have? And now we have them all. Also, be sure to check out Radio Boston's Brewed in Mass series right here on WBUR. Quick plug here, coming up at CitySpace, join us for our next Curated Cuisine with the creators of the popular Food Waste Feast Instagram. If you're not following it, please do. The authors of Perfectly Good Food, Margaret and Irene Lee, right here at CitySpace. You may have heard of them. They created the incredible Mei dumplings, now in South Boston. It's going to be fun. Find tickets at wbur.org/events. And now for the winners tonight of the $150 gift cards. Drumroll. Shoshana. There you go. I'll hang on to this. Meet Anna at the front desk. And I also have Gabrielle Burain? Gabrielle, congrats. Please see Anna at the front desk for those. Now let's open up the beer tasting back up. Please join us in the lobby for more and say hi to all the brewers who came tonight. Thank you all.